Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a seriously profound journey. We're going to crack open a highly clinical book of linguistics, literally the science of how language is built from the ground up, and we're going to use its details as a lens to understand one of the most visceral examples of human resilience we've seen, the 2025 Indus River flood. As you'll see, the seemingly sterile mechanics of human speech actually serve as our greatest vessel for memory. Okay, let's dive into this with a pretty haunting perspective, written from the point of view of the Indus River itself. For centuries, we tried to cage this river behind concrete. We mapped it out, and in doing so, we kind of completely forgot its history. But when the sky broke open, the river returned, and it wasn't in anger, actually. It was in memory. It swept through courtyards and streets, taking wooden toys, prayer mats, bridal veils. While the news anchors were out there counting the losses in these sterile numbers and hectares, the river, it was counting in voices. So that brings us to the critical question driving this entire explainer. When a disaster swallows your entire world literally overnight, when the silence right after the roar is just deafening, how do we, as humans, build the language to actually process that memory? How do we use the mechanical strata of linguistics to process unimaginable grief and loss? Section 1. The sounds of language, phonetics and phonology. To really understand how we communicate tragedy, we've got to start right at the bottom stratum of language, the physical sounds we produce. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we mean. The International Phonetic Alphabet vowel chart is a literal map of the physical space inside the human mouth. It shows exactly how our articulators, the tongue, the jaw, the palate, how they shape the air flowing up from our lungs. It's wild, but the human mouth can actually produce over 100 distinct vowel sounds. Linguistics takes this messy, continuous flow of speech and breaks it down into these discrete physical units. To really get why these physical sounds matter so much, picture the villagers who stood on their doorsteps, raising their hands to the sky. They'd been in a severe drought, so they were praying for rahmat, mercy. But what actually arrived was azab, punishment. In linguistics, we call these minimal pairs, which are words that mean completely different things just by swapping out a couple of specific sounds. The villagers uttered a specific sequence of phonetic sounds to ask for life, but the reality they were met with was entirely different. It just goes to show how the physical sounds we push into the air carry our absolute deepest pleas. So a phoneme is basically a speech sound defined by physical features. For instance, whether your vocal cords are vibrating, which makes it voiced, or not. It's a highly clinical, articulatory definition. But I want you to contrast that sterile textbook concept with the heartbreaking reality of a young boy named Rihan. When the flood hit, he waded out into the dark waters, desperately calling for his youngest buffalo calf, Sony. Later on, survivors in the relief camps would hear this lone buffalo bell drifting through the night. The physical vibration of that bell, much like a voiced phoneme, became this profound sound of memory. It was an auditory signal of a boy who literally never let go of his herd. Moving on to Section 2, building words and morphemes, morphology. Now that we have our basic sounds down, let's step up a level to see how we actually build the words required to describe a disaster. Unlike a syllable, which is really just a phonetic grouping, a morpheme is the minimal part of speech that actually bears meaning. It's an indecomposable sign of language. Think about the pink cartoon rabbits on 12-year-old Asha's lost school bag. The bag was found bloated but totally intact against a tree. Just as a morpheme is an indecomposable sign of meaning, that tiny visual symbol carried the immense weight of a little girl's dreams and a father's unspeakable loss. Morphology builds logically, right? We start with a root noun. Let's take boat. Add a plural affix, like the letter S. And boom, we get a brand new complex meaning, boats. Simple, textbook morphological rule. But let's ground that in the reality of Hajamgoth. It was a half-submerged village where little Bilal and his friends tied empty plastic bottles together to make boats. By adding more bottles, they multiplied their toys. It shows that even in the face of absolute ruin, we humans inherently understand how to combine basic units to build complex, meaningful things. Whether it's adding an S to a word or tying plastic waste together to create a tiny bit of joy in the floodwaters. Fundamentally, morphology is about attaching new meaning to existing roots over time. Over in Kot Mathan, Saba and Irfan's wedding was totally washed away. All that was left was her red bridal lenga clinging to a tree. But months later, Irfan went back and planted a sapling exactly where their bridal sage had been. He said, "So it remembers us." Just like a linguistic affix changes the meaning of a root word, Irfan attached a completely new, living symbol to a place of profound tragedy. He transformed a site of loss into a site of enduring memory. Section 3. The structure of sentences syntax. We're moving up the linguistic strata here, where individual words are now arranged into larger constituents and complex trees. So, the crucial point is that syntax isn't just about sterile grammatical rules or, drawing tree diagrams on a blackboard. Its real magic lies in its infinite generative capacity. By just using a finite set of words, we can generate a literal endless amount of completely new, unique sentences to describe an infinitely complex world. We actually see this theoretical concept perfectly anchored in the story of 12-year-old Zara. She was living in a relief camp that constantly smelled of disinfectant and rain. But she found these pieces of discarded packaging, biscuit wrappers, the backs of aid forms, and she just began to record what she saw. She took this infinite generative power of syntax and used it to document the endless variations of human survival around her. She hid those scraps in an empty flour sack, just so the world wouldn't forget. For example, she constructed sentences like this one. The woman who lost her house but still braids her daughter's hair every morning. Look at the deep syntactic structure there. It successfully captures an incredibly complex reality. You have absolute destruction side by side with the quiet, enduring dignity of a daily human ritual. That right there is the true power of syntax. It lets us combine words into a structure strong enough to hold the immense weight of our shared humanity. All right, Section 4, Making Meaning and Semantics. Here we transition into the study of what our expressions actually mean in reality. So, how do we derive truth from words? Semantics dictates the truth value of a proposition, but how do you derive truth when it's completely obscured? Think of Haji Karim. He climbed up to his roof, clutching an old radio to his chest, as the floodwaters literally swallowed his town. The news anchor was on there announcing road closures and missing persons, but the truth Haji Karim was desperately looking for, the fate of 5 brothers he knew, was just lost in the static between frequencies. How does semantics even work when the truth is drowning? Well, formal semantics relies on this thesis of compositionality. It treats meaning almost like a mathematical function of its parts. The idea is, if you understand the parts, you understand the whole. But as we know, in the real world, human meaning carries this heavy, unspoken, pragmatic weight that a simple math equation just can't capture. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this stark contrast between these two realities. On one side, we have this sterile, mathematical semantics, neat donation figures read by a TV anchor, sounding all beautiful and perfectly symmetrical. But on the other side, we have the visceral, lived meaning, a woman in Karachi dropping her gold bangles into a relief box, whispering, for someone's daughter. The news reports hectares lost, but the semantic reality is a mother screaming her son's name into the pitch black. The clinical data really only tells a fraction of what the language actually means to the people surviving it. Which brings us to our final stratum, Section 5, How Language Remembers, Historical Linguistics. This is the study of how languages, exactly like rivers, change their shape and carve new veins over the passage of time. If you trace the massive evolution of Indo-European roots over thousands of years, it reveals a pretty profound truth. Language is absolutely not a static list of rules. It's a living, shifting entity. It spreads, it adapts, it gets passed down across millennia, literally outliving entire empires and cultures. Let's move to and see how this builds. Historical linguistics relies on sound laws, like how the Dutch P sound systematically shifted to the German Pf over centuries. Language transforms, sure, but the core identity survives. It's the same with the flood. When the waters finally receded, people said the land had completely changed shape. Whole villages had shifted, but the water remembered everything. It remembered Rihan's bell, Saba's red dress, the plastic boats. The forms change, but the deep structure of memory remains completely intact. Remember when young Zara hid her writings on those biscuit wrappers in a flour sack? She actually whispered these words to them. If I forget, you remember. Months later, volunteers found that sack. The ink had run, the words were totally blurred, but the lines still shimmered like veins beneath the skin. Language, at its absolute core, is our defiance against being erased. So I'll leave you with this final thought. When you look at the clinical science of phonemes, morphemes, and syntax, you aren't just looking at the dry rules of communication. You are looking at the architecture of human resilience. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Next time you speak, I hope you remember the sheer power of the words you're pushing into the air.